So hi, I'm Jordi. I'm not from the US, as you may hear. I'll do my best to not sound too French, although I'm not French. I'm from Belgium. I do speak French, which gives me the accent, but just please don't call me French. I'm sorry, I didn't see you were there. No, it's fine. It's just we have the minority complex of being like the small country. So just a quick like rule. If you have any questions, just feel free to interrupt because we have more than enough time for questions, I think. So like anytime, just raise your hand and I'll try to get it as soon as possible. Now you're banned. Just all right. So let's get started. Also, I have this remote that has been kindly left here. I'll try and use it, but I never use one, so it's probably gonna go wrong. So, yeah, it's dead apparently. Okay, that went well. So, Composer. First of all, I don't want to talk about Composer. I want to talk about semantic versioning quickly. If you were in the talk this morning, I don't remember the name of the person who did it, I'm sorry, but he mentioned this already a little bit. I'll repeat it just so it's clearly ingrained, and for those who weren't there. So semantic versioning, it's like a little page on semver.org. It's a screen worth of text. It's not that long. And it's quite an important read, so I would like deeply encourage you to go and read it if you haven't. I'll quickly highlight what it is, but I think it's really it's a must for everyone to go and read that, I think, because it's defining a contract between maintainers and users of open source packages. So it's quite crucial that we're all on the same page with regard to that. So what it defines essentially is you have those three major minor patch versions. I guess anyone knows that. Sort of like it's the common thing most projects do, but then it gets a bit tricky when we see what they mean. They're defined as the major being for backward compatibility breaks. The minor is for features, like new features, and the patch is for just bug fixes. So how does this look? Well, first of all, when we're at 0 point, you might know that the 0 versions are kind of weird because it's usually like pre-stable, and we kind of lose one. We have this like major is always going to be 0, so it's all kind of offset where we have the major being the 1, and then the bug fixes and features are kind of cobbled together in the third digit. So if you do bug fixes, you would just bump that. If you do any breaking changes, you should really bump the second, like the minor technically. And then ideally, you should really go as soon as possible to the 1.0, because actually semver doesn't really define this. Like the 0 version, they're defined as do whatever you want. Like there's no clear definition of that's a common assumption that people follow, but it's not actually specified. So ideally, you should just start at version 1 and just ignore the zeros. Anyway, from there on, it's kind of by the spec semver, ideally, and you just bump when you have fixes the third one, the patch version. If you do any new features, you bump the second one. And if you break anything, and that's the most important, you really should bump the major version. And again, like this, it gives us all an idea that when we look at the version number, and like I know I'm using the 1.5 right now, I see a new release. If it's 1.6, I know I can probably use that. It's going to be new stuff, but it's fairly safe for me to use it because it shouldn't break anything. If I see a 2.0 coming up, it's like, okay, now I need to watch out. It's probably breaking changes. I need to go look a bit deeper in the changelog. Maybe there's some upgrade file. So it's a way of communicating in it's a very concise way, like high bandwidth communication with all your users. Holy shit. That is just, wow. All right. I had never seen that screen, I think. Cool. So let's hope that boots fast, yeah? Where was I? So yeah, Composer. Now, so the funny thing is, like, I gave a keynote last week. I had the browser crash, which was already fairly uncommon. That's my first. Now the whole machine crashes. It's like, whoa. Yeah, that's me when I have to restart my computer. All right, let's hope this goes quickly. Yeah. Oh, fuck. Internet, yes. So that was lucky. Oh, God. See, that's why you should never restart your computer. Yeah, just turn off the camera, it's fine. You don't need to tape this. All right. Let's hope this goes better.
Expect an overheard tweet by me.
Yeah. All right. So that's where I was. Someone in the Node community had this slide, and I think it's quite amazing. It's the German word for the fear of increasing the major version. It's Hauptversionsnummern, Erhöhungsangst, whatever. I did my best. And it's just kind of, it was just making fun of the fear that people have of, going to version 2 or 3 or 4. And it's like people are afraid of running out of numbers, but there is really no fear to be had because, even beyond 9, you can have 10 and it's just fine. And like this scales to fairly large numbers. So yeah, really, like, there's no reason to be afraid there. And just when you need to break something, do it, but please bump the version. All right. So now let's talk a bit more about maintaining packages. If you do release anything, like if you have an open source package, does anyone here maintain anything like open source stuff you have released? Just a few hands, really? Come on. Okay. Well, I think like there are a few things that need to be taken care of. The README file is like the most important because it's kind of the doorway to your project. And when people come and the README is empty, or like it just says, yeah, this does kind of things, but you look at that and you don't want to use that library. Like you don't even know what it does. You skip and you just move on to the next one. So having a story, and I insist on the word story, and not just like a technical nerdy explanation of what it is it does, but more like a story of which problems it's solving and so on. That's a good way to get people to care, I think, because they might see what it's good for directly. Having some basic infos about how to use the library, how to contribute to it. The license is fairly critical. That's all important stuff. If you want more, there's this blog post that's quite comprehensive about readmes and so on, and the phppackageChecklist.com, which lists a bunch of things you want to check before releasing. Another point is to tag releases, because like a lot of people still rely on this dev master for everything, and that means everyone uses the master branch. That's fine, but not really, because eventually you're gonna want to break something, and then if there is no tag, everyone is stuck. So if you do break something, at the very least, tag before doing that. Yeah, just a git tag. It's not so much to ask, I think. Then finally, the changelog is also something that's quite critical. To me, like it's one of the things which I really insist on when I release anything, is to look at all the commits and not doing it in an automated manner of like dumping the whole commit log into a file, because usually that's fairly noisy. There are merge commits and so on, or maybe the commit messages are not quite up to speed with the changes that were done. So actually going through them like as a human and translating that to sentences that make sense, and that like filtering out the useless stuff, and so you end up with something like this where you have fairly clear to understand. Yeah, like I think that's kind of the least you can do for your users. If you release a new version, they should be able to know quickly, okay, what's up here. Especially with backwards compatibility breaks, you really want to highlight those. All right, now let's go more into composer-specific things. So there are a few constraints you can use, right? When you require packages, that's the basic, like you ask for a specific version, you get it, no problem. Then you have like wildcards. That's also fairly simple. I think anyone sees that, they know what it means. It's just any version in that range, like 1.0 point anything. Some new ones that came up like late last year, I guess, so it's not so new anymore. We have support for like kind of the whole semantic versioning constraint stuff that NPM has. So if you use Node, you might be familiar with those, and most like the goal was to have interoperability with Node, because I think like if you do something else in PHP, it's most likely going to be JavaScript. So we have a few new operators where like the range with just a dash, so you can define ranges between two versions. So if you only define two numbers like this, it basically adds a wildcard at the end of the 2.0, so it's 2.0 point anything. But if you define a specific version, then it's including that one, and that's it. Then we have unbounded ranges, which are a pretty bad idea. I'm not saying you should use them, but I just want to insist on the fact that if you do that, if we follow Semver again, it's essentially saying, I want all the backwards compatibility breaks, and it's fine. So that's just fairly terrible idea, I think. The only point where I would concede using it is for the PHP version. Because if you require PHP, like technically 7 will break some minor things, but then again it's a pain if we have to go and update all the packages out there to change the PHP requirement to be able to use the new PHP version, right? So I don't know, that's one way you can argue, but for anything else, really try and avoid this. Then we have new operators. The end is a space, so it's kind of not there. And the OR is double pipe. This one is pretty old, right? I guess most people know it, like the tilde. And it just means, like it's kind of useful. It means that the last digit you define can go up. So it's like, in this case, the 2 can become 3, 4, and 5, and that's fine. But the 1, like anything before the last digit, cannot change. So it has to remain at 1 point something. So that, again, it works well with semantic versioning because it will prevent any backwards compatibility break from being added to your project. The problem was, if you do something like this, where you need at least a bug fix that was in that version 1.2.3, then suddenly it blocks you to the 1.2 range. So there is now the caret operator, which kind of follows Semver more closely, and even with if you define 1.2.3, it still lets you go all the way up to 2.0, but just not including 2.0. So, yeah, it's also like following the sort of same implicit thing of the 0-point versions, where it assumes that from 0.3 to 0.4 you're gonna have backwards compatibility breaks. So it just also blocks you there. So I think for libraries it's absolutely essential to use that, because you have to allow a fairly broad like version range, like as broad as possible. Because all you need is, you need some features, you want to require at least that, but upwards you shouldn't really limit it, at least until until a BC break version appears. So yeah, for libraries, essential. For projects, you can argue like it depends a bit. I mean by projects, I mean like internal applications you develop or something like that. Maybe you want to be more specific just to be on the safe side, but I think by default it's probably a good idea. So yeah, just really use it everywhere. Still no questions so far?
The wildcard operator, is that going to always grab the highest version?
Okay, so the question is, the wildcard operator, is it going to grab the highest version? Yes, and like all operators, basically those are just constraints, right? They define which versions are okay to look at, and then there's a second step, which is like from those versions, pick one, and that's by default it's gonna take the highest. There are two things that can affect that. One is just a command line flag that's available that's prefer lowest, I think. So -- prefer lowest when you install. This is not so useful for that's why it's only a command line flag. There's no option or anything. It's only useful for testing, I think, because it allows you to, it will take the lowest possible version of everything. So it kind of lets you test against your minimum requirements, just to make sure that in your CI, you can just ensure that those requirements are actually correct. Because sometimes, it could be that you have an old requirement and you're using the latest version and you use new features without realizing it. So that's one thing. The other is in the config, you can have prefer stable, I believe. And that it will still go to the highest, but also the most stable. So it's it will go as high as possible while keeping the most stable version. So if you have a beta, it's gonna skip that if there is a stable. But otherwise, if the beta is higher, it would take that. By default, that's the behavior is highest always. Yes?
What's the advantage of using the caret over the tilde?
The advantage of the caret over the tilde. It's really just this minor use case here, I think. It's saying, in this case, you see you're restricted to 1.3 because it only allows this is the only one that can change. So it blocks the 1.2. And it's not really what you want in this case. So with the caret, you kind of go all the way up to 2.0. Is that clear? Or? All right. No other questions on that? Okay. If you install new packages, one thing is to use composer require. I don't know how many of you still go and edit the JSON. I mean, I still do sometimes just out of habit, but it's a fairly poor experience compared to just typing composer require, because well, first of all, you don't have to deal with JSON, but also it will just look at the current version and add that as the constraint. So it will automatically add add the best constraint sort of. So yeah, definitely try and use that. Then I was mentioning stabilities just a minute ago, and those are the stabilities we have, right? So it goes from dev, which is the most unstable, to alpha, beta, RC, and unstable. Those are all in order, so RC is more stable than beta, and so on. That's quite important to grasp. And then the way they're defined, like the stability is taken from the tag names, basically. So it's fairly simple. If you tag something with beta, it becomes beta. Or if there is no stability indicator, it's just stable. Now the other thing is for branches, they're always dev, because branches being like unstable things, they're not point in time. They're just like a branch where you can always commit something new. So in that case, we force it to be dev no matter what the branch is called. So even if you call a branch something beta, it's just still going to make it dev. So there are a few things that let you sort of like play with those stabilities. Because by default, by default we have the minimum stability set to stable. So anything that is not stable is just not visible to Composer, like it won't install it. And then there are a few ways you can change that. So in the foobar package there, we use this @dev, which so the part is not really part of the constraint. It's just saying this package can be dev and above. So it doesn't have to be stable anymore. But this applies only to this one. So you can use @alpha as well. And you'll get so that means in the first example, the foobar there, that means if there is a dev version, it's going to install it. But if there isn't, it's fine. It'll just go back to a stable or anything. On the other hand, with the last example, this foo cooks, I don't know why I wrote this because I don't know how to pronounce it. You ask specifically for the 10x dev, which would be like a 1.0 branch or something like that. So in this case, you ask for that explicitly. So it sees that you ask for a dev version, so it also puts the implicit @dev behind. But if this version doesn't exist, it doesn't work anymore, right? So like it's not the same behavior exactly. Because sometimes people ask like, how do I require that dev version? If you really need it, you have to do it like that. Then the minimum stability, as I said, is like just a global filter for everything else that doesn't have a flag. So in this case, we allow like beta, RC, and stable versions. Another point that came up a few days ago is people on Twitter that were really confused how to use the create project command if you don't have a tag, because by default it will take the latest version and then it's fine. But if you have only the dev master branch version, then you need to actually tell it to go down to bring down the stability to dev or in any of these ways. So it's all kind of the same deal of like whitelisting that package to be dev. All right, let's go over some conflict examples. So in this case, we have like that's our package on top there that requires two. There's the cool Alice package and the lazy Bob, and those are defined down there. So both of these require monologue, but as we see, like the cool Alice one requires it in at least 1.6, but that can go up to excluding 2.0. And the other one just requires monologue in version 1.3 point anything. So if you try and install that, you get a wall of error, and most people are kind of displeased when they see this. And I get it. It's not the nicest. But if you look at it like in this case, kind of sequentially, it makes sense, right? Like you have the installation request here for lazybob. That's like installation request means our composer JSON is requesting this package. And then it says this one is satisfiable, all good. The same for cool Alice, satisfiable, all good. Then we have lazybob requiring monologue. And we see which versions of Monolog here are satisfying it. So there you have a set of versions. And you have the same again for the for cool Alice. And you see another set of versions. The problem is these two sets have no intersection. So there's no way to install that, as PHP doesn't let us install two versions, like two separate versions of one same class. It's just not possible. So that's why you get the error. And it tells you I can only install Monolog either 1.6, 1.3, or like either of these, but not everything. So the conclusion is just not installing anything. Is that clear? Like, if you see it this way? So I think it's actually worth reading this output. Like if you so happen to have a conflict, it's not the prettiest thing, but it actually contains the information in most cases to figure out what's going wrong. And in this case, like you can't do much except send a pull request to the lazy Bob package and change the requirement, because most likely if it works with the version 1.3, it's also fine with the 1.6. Okay. Another example. So here we require this. So we require Monolog ourselves in version 1 point anything, and we have then this bad package that requires Monolog in the dev master. So as I mentioned earlier, dev master isn't the smartest idea. It's convenient when you're first like trying things out and all, but in this case we get a problem. It says like we're installing bad package, and that's fine. Then bad package requires Monolog, dev master, and there it says no matching package found. Now if you go look on packages, you're gonna see that Monolog has a dev master version. So this is kind of confusing, and that's what I meant before by saying that when you have the minimum stability set to stable, it just does not see these versions at all. Like they're completely filtered out. So it can't even tell you there is one, but I can't install it, which is probably something we should fix, but priorities. So for now, it just tells you this. And yeah, as you see here, we have minimum stability beta, so dev isn't allowed, so it just doesn't exist. So what can we do? We can require Monolog in dev as well. So we can add this add dev flag, and then it's all good. It will install. And yeah, this one weird thing though is if you look at it, you require here dev master and here 1 point something. And dev master isn't 1 point anything, right? It's just a name. So what makes this work is this branch alias feature, where we can say like Monolog can define that the master branch is an equivalent of 1.12. So that's a kind of weird hack, but it lets us reconcile those two requirements sort of in a way that it's like you require dev master, you require 1 point something, and yeah, they match for now because master is a 1 point something. So all is well, and it just installs it. But then what happens when we change the branch alias? Like if Monolog, the master branch, becomes 2.0, then you're back to a problem, because suddenly you require dev master, and this one, like this time, we see that that it is visible, right? Because we allowed Monolog to be dev, so it doesn't say that the bad package dependency is like no. It doesn't say no package found. It says it is satisfiable, but dev master isn't a 1 point something anymore. So you have a conflict again. Now at this point, there is just not much you can do. Like you can go with requiring the version 2, but most likely this breaks like both your application and the bad package dependency. So pretty bad idea to require dev master. Like at least in the long term, like you should really avoid it. Questions? Nope. All right. Let's go on to the log file. Does anyone add it to their Gitting now? The log file? Yeah, we have a few nods. Depends. Okay, we can discuss that after maybe. So I would say like don't ignore it. And there are a few reasons. The first one is that it's used like it gives you this reproducible installs, right? It's like the first time you install, you have no log file. It will figure out which packages need to be installed, and then it dumps that into the composer.log. And now you have like the current state of your dependencies. Now, what happens if you add it to Gitting now, then you have, let's say, a build server or something. You do an install there. There's no log file, so we'll start from scratch. And maybe there's a new version in the meantime. So you'll get that new version on the build server or in production maybe. And if there is a regression, you get suddenly like you deploy something that has a regression in it and you never tested it locally, or it was maybe not tested between the build and the production or whatever. Like just bad things happen. It might be a coworker installing and like they have some error you don't see, and it's like you waste time with like trying to understand what's wrong, and it's just a different dependency version. So this reproducible installs is quite critical already. But the other thing is it gives you like way faster installations with essentially no memory usage, because it only, like if you do a composer install and you have the log file present, it just looks at that, it completely ignores packages and all that. So it loads like, the whatever few packages you have in there, and it resolves the dependencies from that, which is like, it's really fast because there are just a few packages. So that comes in handy, for performance, sure, but the main reason I think is if you deploy to like virtual machines or VPSs and stuff like that don't have a whole lot of memory, or like low CPU as well, it's quite convenient because there you can just install and it takes like 5 megs of RAM or something. So while if you run an update, maybe you're gonna spike to a few hundred megs, and that will like just break on the VM. So yeah, again, like please do commit it, and then you should run composer install and not update, because if you run update, it ignores the log file and it just regenerates one. So you should run composer install unless like you're trying to really update the dependencies to the latest state. So I hope that's clear for everyone that nodded before. You nod again, so I'm gonna go with yes. So yeah, just commit it again. But there's a big but here. Just don't deploy it, because again, it's like the contents of the file is everything you're using in your application with the exact version information. You don't want this stuff to end up on Google, because if you're using some old version of something with a vulnerability, it's just fairly easy to find. So I don't care how you do it, but it shouldn't end up like publicly visible. So either delete it after deploy or move it out of the root directory of the project. Like there are many ways to handle this, and this is a per deployment thing, but it really shouldn't be there. Another interesting fact is Google thinks that this is the domain because it starts with www. So it gives us this ad for, I don't know, nothing to do with Composer, but I thought it was interesting. Okay. Another thing that's been out for quite a while now is the ability to define custom commands. So in this case, we have this this test that's not like the scripts. In case you don't know it, they let you they let you handle like events, so you can define a script that's going to be executed after package install or after the update command has been executed, and so on. Now this like test is not one of these scripts that Composer defines, but what happens is when you run Composer test, it sees, okay, I don't have a command to handle this, so it looks in the script, and if there is one, it just executes that as a like shell command sort of, or it can also be a PHP callback. So I think like this may or may not be very useful, but one thing that I would like to see is that everyone at least defines a test command, because these days, like you have, it used to be that PHP unit was the end all of testing, but these days you have bhat and PHP spec and like maybe other stuff, and so like it kind of becomes harder and harder to run the test suite. As you have like a few commands you're supposed to run, and so if you come in a new project, it's nice if you can just say like Composer test, and I don't care what you do in the back, it's just test this thing. So as a sort of like standard way of testing a project, of like bootstrapping the test suite, that would be kind of cool if everyone adds it. Finally, if you try and use a fork of something, like typically this would happen if if you work with some libraries or framework or something, and you find a bug. If you fix it yourself and you really need this fix, you kind of want to use that, like this patch version you have, like until it's been merged and tagged in a release and so on. So the easy way to do this is to define this new repository here, where you just have like the URL of your fork. So in this case, I have this Symfony fork, and I can I just require that dev master instead of the 2 point whatever I'm using. So this by default it will work because like this repository is defined above the implicit packages repository that we just insert at the end. So the packages defined in there will just like win over the packages one. But then, yeah, there's a bit of an issue. Is usually you do a patch in a feature branch, and so if you require here dev my patch, that is fine. The problem is most likely if it's something as like kind of entangled as a framework where you have like Symfony, you also require some bundles, which are like plugins, and these require Symfony as well. So you start having conflicts there, because suddenly like the bundles don't find the version 2.6 that they require, and then because dev my patch isn't 2.6. So we could use the branch alias thing I explained about before to define like the dev my patch is 2.6. Problem is you can't really do that in your branch, because when it gets merged, you don't want to have this Composer JSON change merged back into Symfony. So there is a way, like that's kind of a hack, is to use an alias. So you say I require dev my patch as 2.5 or 2.6 or whatever you need, and this will do much like the branch alias. It will just like give this package kind of two versions, so it satisfies both the 2 point something requirements and the dev my patch, which is what you require. But it will install the first, just like masquerade it as the second as well. Was that clear? All right. A few community resources I want to highlight. Packanalyst is, I think, the worst name ever, but it's a pretty cool thing. It's essentially scanning all of the source code of all of the packages that are on packages.org, and it puts all that in a search engine, like in a search index. And then it lets you query it by class name or interface name or stuff like that. So you can actually see, like, if you have an open source package, you can see, let's say, if you have an interface, who is using or who is implementing that interface in the other, like in the rest of the open source ecosystem. So it obviously doesn't tell you exactly, who is using what and how in their private code, but still it's a fairly good indicator to guide decisions if you want to change an interface or like add new stuff. You can have a look, or just to figure out who is using your stuff in which ways. It's pretty interesting, and it's a fairly cool idea. Semver.be is also an unfortunate name, I think, but whatever. It's just a tool to, or you can put a package name and a version constraint, and it will show you all the versions, I think, and like highlight those that would match that requirement. So that's a good way if you're a bit confused with the version constraints and want to check. Like, it's a good tool to kind of visually learn this. Melody that's an amazing name. No, it's a cool name, but it's difficult to explain. I think in a sentence is it lets you run scripts that have like, so if you want to do like old school PHP scripts where you have, just one file, everything cobbled up together, it lets you define the JSON, like kind of the composer JSON on top with the requirements. So you have like some weird block on top of the file that was inline JSON, sort of, and then it runs the script. So when you use then you can run it like on the command line. You say melody run blah blah.php. It will look at which packages are required, install them in the back in the temp directory, include the autoloader, and then run your file. So you have your file that can depend on other stuff, but still be like a fairly simple, contained, like all-in-one script, which is a kind of cool idea. Also lets you run, I think, from GitHub gist. So you can just say like melody run and then the gist ID. So you can store there all your scripts and stuff like that. Version.i lets you, it does many things, but I think the interesting thing for me, because it's still missing still a missing feature in packages, is to see what uses a package. So if you put your package name there, then /references, you see the full list of open source packages requiring yours. Then we have this that came up today from Ed Finkler. I don't know if he's here, but it's still kind of rough. But he showed it to me this morning, and it's like they put all the packages stuff into Neo4j, and so they let you like visualize these things as a graph, and like expand or like see the relationships between, let's say, two maintainers, or like how many hops do you need between two people or two packages to kind of see the relationships. It's still like, it's early, but I think it's fairly promising, and I'm sure if they keep digging, they'll find cool use cases. And finally, a list of awesome PHP packages. So if you find that on packages it's a bit too messy and there's too much to make a decision, you can check that. It's the opinionated list of someone, so it's worth what it's worth. But it's a fairly long list, and there's like a few good, like few sort of like trusted libraries in any category. So it's pretty valuable, I think. Then I just want to talk real quick about torrent proxy. So what it is just a proxy thing that you can install on your servers, and it gives you like fast installations because everything is close to you. Like it's it will cache cache or mirror the Git repositories and the zip files and so on. So you have like everything ready there for when you install. You install from your server, so you have like hopefully higher bandwidth than from GitHub. Also, if GitHub is down, I would hope that your server is not down, so you can still install from that. So those are that's the kind of key feature. And then on the other hand, it also lets you host private packages. So not like private repos, but just sort of having your own little private packagist where you can like add internal packages you have and start depending on them and so on. And that way you just have to add like one repository and it's all in. And yeah, the only catch is it's for sale. It's not free. It's the one thing I do that I'm trying to sell. And the reason is just like trying to feed back money into the open source time, because yeah, this thing kind of doesn't scale at some point where you spend so much time on it. You have to, still pay the bills. So yeah, I don't want to insist on this too much, but I just would like you to go and check it out if you think this might be something for you. Yeah, that's all. All right, thank you. We still have 10 minutes for questions, so in case you have anything else, like Jeremy, if nobody else has a question, you may be allowed to ask a question. Yeah?
Can you explain the dev, required dev and stuff like that? It's now default for your install?
So explaining the dev, require dev, you mean, so you have the two blocks, like the require and require dev? Yeah. Okay.
Did something also change?
Yeah, so it did, like in the beginning we installed only the requirements by default. When you ran install and when you ran update, it installed both. And that was kind of confusing people, so we switched it to be always install everything by default. And I think it makes more sense because so now whatever you run, like typically if you run composer install, it's going to be like, if you type it yourself, let's say, it's going to be on a dev machine or something where you actually want the dev stuff to come with, right? And there's this no dev flag that you can add, but that you would add it like on your deployment script or something like that, where you will hopefully type it once. So that was the rationale for the change, but I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. Yeah? All right. Yes?
We're using a packages clone and GitLab for our repos, and repositories aren't cached. Is there something that we can do about that? Like an additional configuration or anything?
What are you using for the? Are you using Packagist?
Packages clone for the private dependencies.
Uh-huh.
So that's where we register our repositories on our GitLab server.
Okay.
Is there an archive configuration or something would that help me with that?
I'm not sure, but maybe we can check afterwards because that's. Any other questions before I allow Jeremy?
We're at a conference, there's a lot of murders happening. I was wondering, what is the bus factor of composer and packages?
Yeah.
God forbid what happens.
Yes, so the question is bus factor and everything. Yeah, it's. I guess it's not so good looking. Yeah. No, I don't have a great answer to that. Like, I agree there is a problem probably.
Should we be covered in pillows?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what to say to that. Like, it's. I see what you mean, and yes, I'm doing probably too much.
Like, are there ways to put people in?
Like that,
I know Nils doesn't do anything, but
I mean, he has access to, like the server and all of that, so it's not, if I vanish, it will carry on somehow, I guess, but I mean, mostly I think the problem would be the maintenance of the project. That, well, I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of the main person, and it's difficult to like bring more people in. So I don't know. I'm still young, I think. No. Any other question? All right. Well, thank you.